Teachers on Teaching is a monthly event. He said you can find Teachers on Teaching through email. We send these out to faculty roughly once a month. And if there is a topic that you'd like to share about teaching, by all means, send me an email at jlbetc@rt.edu. We'll be happy to take it into consideration. I also want to mention something new we're trying with this Teachers on Teaching event is continuing the conversation after the event in the Teaching and Learning Commons at tlcommons.rit.edu. And I'll email all of you a link to the discussion thread related to using social media tools in the classroom. A little bit about Mike. Mike Johansson spent 20 plus years in various capacities for media companies in New Zealand, Australia.
More like close to 30, but we don't like that far.
Still fits within 20 plus.
Yeah.
In many English-speaking countries. Before joining the Department of Communication in 2009, among his achievements, he won 2 fellowships to the Poynter Institute in St. Petersburg for publication design and media ethics studies. He was one of 12 UC Berkeley Digital Journalism Fellows in 2003. And in 2004, he founded Insider, a free weekly publication for 20-somethings in Rochester. In addition to teaching, speaking, and writing about journalism, public relations, and advertising, copywriting, Mike has a passion for social media and how it's changing all forms of communication, which brings us to today's topic, social media in the classroom.
Oh, thank you. So before I get started, I just wanted to encourage you to ask questions as we go along. This is my second presentation today, and the one this morning was somewhat painful for me because I couldn't get boo out of anyone in the room, and I think they were just intimidated. You don't look like the crowd that's going to get intimidated, so please ask questions as we go along because that makes it better for me and better for you. So what are we going to look at? I guess number one, we're going to start with why use social media in the classroom. A few things, some issues, how I use it, and I'll just touch on 4 platforms, but at that point, if there are other social media platforms you want to ask about how I might use them in the classroom, there certainly are others, but I want to sort of keep it confined. And then just a few other platforms and benefits that they offer in the classroom. So I put this up here because, you know, social media really has been around forever. Just that now it's electronic, and normally when I'm showing this to students, they don't recognize 3/4 of the stuff. You know, Rolodex, what's that thing? You know, it's been around forever. So why do I use it? Well, it works, really. I mean, it really does work. In terms of the students, they initially seemed delighted that you're making them use a tool they're familiar with for something that they're not at all familiar with its use. And so that's a good thing. And I literally, in every class I teach, I have some social media aspect to it. So in a class like Public Relations Writing or PR Writing, in 2 different weeks, we touch on social media. At one point, we're talking about writing in terms of something like a LinkedIn profile and how you have to be able to sum up yourself in 2 or 3 very information-packed, concise, keyword-loaded sentences. And that's a challenge for them. They've never had to do this. And it helps them refine things like an elevator pitch they can use to talk about themselves. And in another instance, we're talking about being able to write on something like Twitter that gives you a 140 character limit and be able to say something meaningful to get people interested to click through to a shortened link to something, which is how you use Twitter if you're doing PR. You want to get people interested, excited, whatever, to click through to a link. That's the purpose of using Twitter for PR. And this is all a challenge to them. And I'm often telling them that the shorter you write, the harder it is. And so it becomes a good writing tool in that class, for example. It does really help with collaborative learning. And I'll give you examples in a little bit, but by its nature, social media sort of encourages people to interact with each other. And so if you present a challenge and say they've got to share what they find in social media and react to other people's shares, it does build collaboration. Obviously, you can demonstrate professional uses. So if you're teaching any kind of subject matter where social media has a role, and you'd be surprised that the places social media has a role. I've encountered groups on LinkedIn, for example, soil engineers have several groups on LinkedIn. And it's soil engineers talking to soil engineers all around the world. And I stumbled upon this because a friend of mine from New Zealand is married to the world's leading expert on what happens when water goes down and mixes with sand deep down and causes earthquakes. And happens to have spent, it's called liquefaction. He happens to have spent the last 5 years in New Zealand. And so because of him, I discovered all these groups. So there is really, there's a funeral directors group on LinkedIn. If there can be a funeral directors group, there's really no reason that any profession couldn't use LinkedIn. Most importantly, connecting with professionals. That cannot be overstated how important that is. If you think that the resume and cover letter is still the main way that people get in front of hiring, your students are really badly informed or being misinformed if that's the case. 90% of jobs are not advertised. You know, if I'm running a company, I just go out on LinkedIn and I look for skill sets that I'm looking at and I contact those people. Jobs not advertised. If your LinkedIn profile doesn't say you have the skill set, you're not in the running for that job. So these are very important things that students need to understand. But there's even research that shows that using social media can be very effective. So my acquaintance Ray Hunko, whom I met 7 years ago now, did some research which was published in 2010 and talked about how students had a greater level of engagement with the classes. And the experiment they ran at university, which is part of the Penn State system, was they took 4 incoming classes of freshmen. Each class, as I recall, had 50 students in it at the start. 2 of them were only allowed to communicate outside the class through a blog chat kind of setup. The other 2 were only allowed to communicate through Twitter. And as you can see, the students in the Twitter group were far more likely to collaborate. They were helping each other solve problems. They were communicating a lot more. Most importantly, their grades were higher. And this was repeated. So it was this 2008, 2009, the 2009, 2010 school year. Exactly the same results. That's pretty powerful stuff, I think. Oh, and if you want to read his book, it's called Engaging Students Through Social Media. Some of the things he talks about in Twitter, Twitter's changed since the book was published. I think it was 2012. University of Washington decided to use social media, and what they wanted to know was what students believed about social media. And what they found is that in using social media in particular classes, and this was a different social media for different types of classes. So some classes were using Facebook groups, some classes were using Twitter, some were using just occasionally a thing like a Twitter chat where you bring in an expert and you're just talking back and forth on Twitter. Again, they got some pretty good results. They found it increased discussion, it demonstrated and reinforced learning, which is something I have found myself. And this part was really interesting. I have not tried this yet, but apparently a couple of faculty at University of Washington, instead of having these blocked off times, they say, want to talk to me live, here are my 2 office hours, but here's a block of time 3 or 4 days a week when I'm on Twitter anyway, and I will undertake, and I have notifications set up. Zip me a question. You'll have an answer within 2 or 3 minutes. So it's virtual office hours. So the results I've seen, the levels of collaborative learning are pretty amazing. In a class I teach called Copywriting and Visualization, it's an advertising concepting course. The students used to have to come up with a little short video or something that they just sort of did. I gave them instructions on how to do it. When I started using an app called Vine, which creates 7-second videos, they had to come up with an advertisement that had a beginning, a middle, and an end, all in 7 seconds. So they have to storybook it, they've got to come up with a product, they've got to do the whole thing. You can do that on your own, and it'll probably be okay. But what I encourage them to do is work in groups of 2s or 3s to help each other. They've still got to have their own Vine, but to help each other. And the quality went through the roof. In fact, we'll see a couple in a few minutes that actually help students get jobs. Because when you go in for a job interview and you can say, oh, and I don't know if you've seen it, but you can go to this URL, click on it, and you can see a little ad I made.
I'm going to
Yes.
just to jump in.
Yeah, sure.
If I'm anticipating something you're going to describe in more detail later to say that, but I'm wondering about, you encourage them to communicate and collaborate with each other. It was an individual assignment, right? But you encourage them to work together.
Sure.
Right? To what extent, and how did you enable that? Like, did you tell them, well, why don't you use this, or did you just simply say, why don't you collaborate and left it to them?
Well, yeah, so in the lecture leading up to this, I talk about using things like a storyboard to map out frame by frame what your 7-second video is going to be. Whether you're going to use, and I have all kinds of tools for them. There's like an instructional video on how to do stop motion in Vine, and there's an instructional video on how to make sure that you time the opening, because it's a looping video, the opening slide is also the closing slide in a sense, so that's where the information has to be. So I give them all kinds of instructions on how to do that, and I say, if this looks overwhelming, it is. If you haven't used Vine before, I get that. But here's what I would suggest. Get in groups of 2 or 3 and bounce your ideas off each other. And then it's a whole lot easier if one person's holding the smartphone or got it on a stand and they're doing stop motion, the other person's doing, like using a ruler to do the movements so that it's all even. If you try and do this and then you're back here doing this, and you do and I say, it's not nearly going to be as good as if you work as a team. And then I show them a previous example, a really good example, and say, this is where 3 students helped each other, and 2 of these videos came out. They were A's. They were great. Sorry.
I think the question is more, do you have much to you structure that? Say, you 3 are a team, you work together, or is it just like, if you want to work with somebody, find a friend and do it?
Yeah, I don't structure. I don't force them to work together. And the only instances where I do that is if there are students, and I always say this ahead of time, if a student does not have a smartphone or a tablet or have access to one, then I make sure that that student gets into a group of a couple of other students that do have that. We don't want anyone not to be able to do the assignment because they don't have a smartphone or don't have a tablet. And I find students, that's why I love teaching at RIT. When I was a teaching assistant at Syracuse and I'd ask students to work together because someone didn't have a piece of technology, like, well, I'm not going to help them. I never get that at RIT, which is why I love teaching here. So yeah, that's the only time I force it, but yeah. Recall of key material. And I'll talk about how I do this, but oftentimes when I'm asking them to do an assignment, sometimes the assignment is about, okay, I want you to, the Vine video, for example, to focus on one key thing that you've learned from this course. And then, within the groups of 3, I just say they can't all do a video about the same key point. That's my only rule. And again, these videos, they all go up into my courses. The students all watch each other's videos, and it reinforces, a dozen, 15 key points from the course in a way that engages them more. And the new skills, the things that they didn't think of that you could possibly do. And get credit for doing it, I suppose. All right, a few issues first, though. There are students who are concerned about sharing personal information. So the way I deal with this is I have them sign a non-disclosure agreement. And I'm happy to share the one I use. It's not legally binding. Be clear about that. It's not like a contract. But does put them on notice that here are the expectations. And basically it says, anything you learn about someone else in this class cannot be shared outside of the class venues of my courses or places where we're going to share, simply because you're privy to information that someone else may not want known outside of this class. The assumption should be you just don't share outside this class. Anyone who's not willing to do an NDA is strongly encouraged by me to reconsider. This is in week 1 where they can drop the class. Only because, were you going to ask a question? Oh, no. Only because I think, you want everyone to feel comfortable that they can participate in social media without worrying about anything. If somebody connects to someone else on Facebook, for example, and then that other student happens to scroll through someone's Facebook feed and find out that someone's, I don't know, in a horrible relationship that's breaking up or something or other. Well, you just don't want people feeling uncomfortable that that kind of information is going to get shared by that person broadly. I've never had anyone not sign the NDA. I've had people ask me why, and we have a discussion about that, but they agree.
I imagine that can really spur a really good discussion about the consequences of social media posting, sharing, and things that people might not think about. That's really good.
Well, in the social media class, this actually comes up in, I think there's a Frontier, Nova, Frontline documentary called The Like Generation. And so they watch that in week 1, and they have to watch it for a discussion in week 2, but I encourage them to watch it between the 2 classes in week 1, because the second class is when we're going to be signing the NDA. And that that Nova documentary gets into all the issues about when things were shared that shouldn't have been shared and stuff. And so you're right, sometimes it has led to a good discussion, other times it's like a shrug, sure, I'll sign it. So can't predict. Sometimes there can be access issues. So I've just learned that I've got to work way ahead. If I'm using a YouTube video, for example, showing people how to do something, I've got to make sure, obviously, it's captioned. I've got to allow time for that and make sure everyone has access. I have reminded students who are creating Vines where there's a spoken segment to it, that there should be a corresponding written segment, because we don't have time between the Vine being shot and it being shown in class and going up live to any possibility of captioning. And besides captioning on Vine, I'm not even sure that you can do that. So I just simply say, anything that's spoken has to somehow be written too, so that everyone in the class can benefit from it. And then behavior expectations. Actually, I've left one out there. I say everyone should be positive, helpful, and considerate. The thing that I stress, and the reason it's not here, is I say professional. And by professional, I just mean if your future boss were to see something you're about to post, would you reconsider posting it? And I hammer on this every single week in the social media course, or any time I'm talking about social media, because anything you post out there becomes part of your digital footprint. And even if you send an ill-advised tweet and then delete it, guess what? The Library of Congress still has a copy, because it's gathering every tweet for Lord knows what reason. And if Google happens to have done one of its big scoops, it's now in Google, in the Google database, even if you deleted it off your account, theoretically. So once posted, it's out there. Student objections. Some people, well, I have a Twitter account and the people on there aren't going to care about me posting X. They don't want to see that. And I said, well, then you either need to create a new Twitter account for this class, or explain to the people who follow you on Twitter that you're now going to take a slightly more professional approach. And occasionally you're going to be posting stuff that has to do with your future career, intentions, plans, and so forth. But not all students are willing to create new accounts. And so the 2 objections there, one is I'll create a new account and then I'll forget about it and it'll haunt me later. And I say, well, here's how I would solve that. Create the extra account, create a reminder in some kind of calendar system a week after the class ends to go back and delete it, and put the password right in with that reminder, so you can just go in and delete it the week after the class ends. The other thing is students will occasionally say, I don't want to be on X social media network. And I'll ask them why. And I haven't found any good legitimate reasons. It tends to be, I was trying to think of the one that we tried for a little while. Meerkat, I think we tried once. Anyway, it was a live video streaming. And they didn't really want to be on it because there are a few people on these live video streaming apps who do wildly inappropriate things. But that doesn't mean you're associated with them. It's only you're associated with them if you follow those people. Just don't follow the people that do weird stuff on live streaming sites. And then there's this whole thing about personal, professional. And this does lead to a good discussion. This is usually in week 2, where we talk about you can have 2 Facebooks, 2 Twitters, and you have the one that's for your fun stuff and one for your professional stuff. But honestly, that's how people get fired, because you forget which one you're posting on. And then when you go to work for the company, there's a long list of people at Chrysler, Coca-Cola, who've lost their jobs because they thought they posted on their personal account and they posted something on their company account. You're better off having one account in each network, and maybe designating Facebook as the place where you have fun and you have a bit of personality, and you put the goofy stuff, and all the others a bit more professional. You can still have fun on the other ones, but you just need to be clear that in the real world, you're one person, you don't have this bifurcated personality. Yeah?
How many students will create a separate account for Facebook?
Let's see, a typical class of 24 students, it'd be 1 or 2. Most just go along with it. And then the other thing students will do, which is they learn to their horror, is, for example, that when they do the Vine video, they'll post it to their Twitter, which is a requirement, so that on the class hashtag, so I know it's there, so I can grade it. But by the time I go to grade it, they assumed I've graded it and they've deleted it. So I go to look for it and it's not there. Oh, but I posted it Thursday by the deadline and I deleted it Friday night because I assumed you'd graded it. Sorry.
Yeah, right.
Good luck with that, you know. And they learn the hard way. Don't delete anything till the course is over. All right, so how I use it in the classroom. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty. So one of the best tools is just simply having them blog. And in 2 of my classes, they're required to write a blog. And it can be on anything they want as long as it's informational. So that makes it a bit easier. It's something they care about. And I tell them it's important because you create, again, it's a little bit of digital real estate that you own. It's demonstrating a bit of who you are. And what's more importantly, I tell them this little story from a student of mine from my second year teaching here who's an accounting major, whose blog and PR writing was making furniture out of milk cartons, step by step. Year and a half after she took my class, Jane comes running up to me on commencement day and again, Professor, I got this great job and it's all thanks to the blog. And I'm like, really? She goes, yeah, I was one of 3 finalists at this big accounting firm in Chicago. And I was amazed I was a finalist. I was even more amazed when they offered me the job. And when I accepted the job, I said, why me? And they said, well, partly because of your blog. And they said, what? And they said, yeah, because there are great accounting students out there. There's all kinds of people who can crunch numbers and do stuff like that. But you showed personality. You showed you've got an interest outside of this. We loved your blog. So she said the blog helped her get a job. And it's true. When people do that Google search, what they find about you helps them form an opinion of you. But in terms of what it does for learning, it really does reinforce learning. If you're forced to write something concisely or convey information, it's that. When you teach someone else, you really reinforce your own learning, which obviously, it really forces you to get better at writing. So the way I grade the blogs is if they're in a 15-week course, they have to post 5 times at 2-week intervals. There are deadlines, and you only get the grade if you've posted by the deadline. It forces them into the habit of doing it. After their first blog post, they get somewhat extensive feedback on the quality of the writing. After the 3rd blog post, they're getting a little less feedback. If the issues identified in the first post are not being addressed, it's like, come on, this blog currently is running at a low C. It could so easily be an A or a B if you did these things. And then they get a grade. I also, in the classes where I have blogs, the way they get extra credit is by doing additional blog posts. So it's a ½ a point extra credit available for each, up to 4 extra blog posts, just to encourage them to keep going. And this teaching others thing, it is amazing. I've had kids, Jennifer Gillette, I think it was one of our students. I think her blog and PR writing was about restoring a 1980s Ms. Pac-Man game, step by step. And it was popular. She got tons of people, registered to get every update on that project.
What platform do you use for blogs?
I offer them, I just tell them there are 3 free ones out there. If you think your blog might have legs down the road, and it might be something you want to keep going, and you might want to try and sell ads on it, I encourage them to go to WordPress, which has the advertising integration and stuff built in. If they're already in the Google realm and they want it pretty straightforward and pretty simple, Blogger, which is a Google tool, uses your Google login credentials, is a good one. That's the one I use. The only one they can't use is Tumblr. And the reason I discourage Tumblr is because it's a blog in the sense of stuff gets posted and gets pushed down, but there's no indexing or cross-referencing like there is on Blogger and WordPress. So when you go to a blog or WordPress blog, you'll see on the right-hand side a list of all the previous posts. And so you can navigate. On Tumblr, you've just got to scroll and scroll. And it really, in terms of helping you get a job or helping demonstrate who you are, it's just not as helpful. There's a bunch of other ones out there that there are, basically just tell them, as long as it's a free tool, as long as it has an index on the side, and then there's all kinds of rules I tell them about blogging. Posts need to be a minimum 250 words. Anything over 500 words doesn't really count. And that's based on Google's perceived algorithm for ranking things. Anything under 250 words may or may not be indexed by Google. No one really understands the Google algorithm, but over time people have kind of guessed at this sort of magical 250 to 500 word range. I tell them if there are words around their intended industry or career, they should make sure those words, it's called keywords, appear in the first and last paragraph. It helps your stuff rise up in search. I tell them to blog on something they care about. And then if they come up with a list of 10 topics for their first 5 blog posts, they're in good shape. If they can't come up with 10 topics, they need to think of something else. Because the blog will peter out pretty quickly if they don't have interest. Twitter. This is my favorite tool to use in the class. And it's for all kinds of reasons. Number one is the class hashtag. And if we have time, I can show you what's been going on in a couple of classes over this semester. But you create a hashtag, and if you're not familiar with it, it simply means putting a hash and putting a few characters after it, and then that becomes a term that you can search on. So I'm teaching 2 sections of a class called Critical Practice in Social Media. The hashtags for those 2 classes are RITSM1 and RITSM2. Every week in that class, the students have to post something on the hashtag, and it's a different assignment each week. And they don't even realize that they're actually researching and learning and teaching themselves. So for example, one of the ones they did a couple of weeks ago was find a statistic on social media about social media that surprises you. 24 students in one class, I think 18 in the other. There wasn't one that was exactly the same as the other. And it's all these statistics that they're sharing with each other, like the fastest growing demographic in both Twitter and Facebook is 55 plus. And then people reply to that, what? And they're teaching each other stuff just by the assignment that you give them. I think that's really powerful. The hashtag also comes in use for a thing called a Twitter chat. And this is where it's a synchronous chat, and it takes a little bit of work to set up, but it's a way powerful teaching tool. So I'll line up a half a dozen experts in a given topic. All the students log in on their computers, and it's asynchronous during the class time. And then I'm the moderator, and I'll let the experts know, here are the 4 questions or 5 questions I'm going to ask. And if you haven't been on a Twitter hashtag chat or Twitter chat, you should check them out. There's thousands of them every week. And they're all in different industries and so forth. And I'll pose a question. The rules are, I pose a question. The students have to let each expert get in one answer. And then they're allowed to ask follow-up questions of the experts. So I'll have 5 questions. I'll never get past question 3 or 4 in an hour, because the students, once they realize they're talking to experts, and I really try and go for high level people. I've had, I've had the VP for product at Facebook. I've had the guy in charge of Cred, which is a worldwide social media influence tool. I just shoot for the stars, and if they say yes, that's great. From their perspective, it's an hour when they're sitting in their office anyway. It's not a huge commitment because they can do a Twitter chat and be doing other things. And they love talking to students. And so it's sort of a win-win. And I have not done a Twitter chat yet where students can say, can't we just do this every week? It's like, yeah, just line up the experts. Last but not least is Twitter research. In Twitter, there's an advanced search function. And what that allows you to do is put in geographic parameters, age parameters, gender, whatever, and find expertise or what people are talking about around any given topic. And it's a pretty powerful search engine. And so that's how I've found experts in a given area that I didn't already know, or how I've found people talking about a topic that I weren't. I was curious, for example, around the time of the Haiti earthquake. I was curious because New Zealand has a lot of it, where I'm from, has a lot of earthquakes. How many New Zealanders are actually in Haiti or helping out after the earthquake? Twitter told me. There were these 3 scientists from Canterbury University who were in this one part of Haiti measuring aftershocks. Found out on Twitter. Pinterest. Anyone on Pinterest? Yeah. So on Pinterest, you create these things called boards, and you literally pin images which are clickable links through to content. So I use it for what I call collective knowledge. So the assignments around Pinterest are always, again, a way of them helping teach each other around a topic. So in the social media class, we'll have an assignment around find infographics that help people understand, and I'll just pick a random, fairly new social media tool. So one of the fairly new ones is Periscope, which is a live video streaming thing through Twitter. So the assignment was find an infographic or a blog post that helps people, or a business particularly, get value out of Periscope. And also, everyone has to post something. That's easy. But what I have them do is then comment on other people's pins and how useful, interesting they were. So to get points, you get a certain number of points for doing the original pin, but half the points are related to commenting on other people's pins.
I have a question. Is there any way, like, to social media that we can link them in? What would be the best way to link them in, for example, to my courses?
I think a better mindset is to link out from my courses to tools like this. You're always guaranteed to be able to put a URL in my courses,
Right.
so I think of it as linking out rather than trying to put content.
All right.
Yeah, I don't know how you'd actually bring it in.
It's a separate login too, so that when you link it, you go into it, then you have to log into your account.
Right. I'm just thinking, like, if you had students doing like an online class, it would be, easier if they could basically go to my courses and from there navigate to all the other resources in the class. If I had an assignment where they had to post to Pinterest.
Well,
You
yeah.
can absolutely link out from my courses and have it open in a new window, so they're original
Right. So
my
just
courses.
put the URL in and then
Yeah.
you can click on it.
So Pinterest is as an example, and I put it in here for a specific reason. It's an example of a social network that offers great capacity, but it's a bit of a pain in the butt. So I create a private board for each class, which means only people who are invited to it have access to it. But to do that, I have to know what email they have attached to their Pinterest account. And you can pretty much guarantee in a class of 24, there'll be 2 or 3 students who give you the wrong email. I can't see the Pinterest board. Okay, well, you must have given me the wrong email. Is there any possibility there are other emails? No, that's not, well, So again, if you're going to do a Pinterest board thing, get ahead of it at least 2 weeks to make sure everyone has access, because you've got to invite them on their email. Yeah.
Can you require them to create a Pinterest account using their RIT email that you have through my courses?
Yeah, the reason I tend to not want to do that is because if they're creating a second Pinterest, if they don't already have one, if they're creating a second, they'll only have access to this private board on that email. And when they try and repin something here that they really want to hang on to for later, they may not be able to, because it's pinning it. In other words, they can't see it from the other account. So that in other words, you can only share on Pinterest. You can only, when you see something, you click the pin button, and there's a list of other accounts you have on other boards. So it prevents them from being able to save stuff for later if they want to. That's the only reason to not do it.
So you said you evaluated them based upon the original post and then the follow-up comments. In my courses, that's fairly easy to do because you're in my courses. You can search in my courses, you can
Yeah.
do statistics and all that stuff. But this is now outside, so is it a difficult process for you to?
It could be. So here's the trick. What I tell them is they pin, then they have to do a screenshot of the bottom of the pin showing them, and then they have to screenshot where they have commented. Because you can imagine with 24 students, and in one of the assignments, which I really regretted, they had to do 3 pins. So it was 24 times 3 pins. It was, whatever that is, I'm trying to do the math, 72, and then they had to comment on 3 others. So it was through another 90 something or other comments. So what I do is I have them take screenshots, put it in a Word doc, make it a PDF, put it in the Dropbox. And then so I do a split screen thing where I open the Dropbox here, I have the Pinterest here, and I can identify very quickly and just verify that they've done what they said they did. So
Otherwise, what, you could doctor the screenshot?
they could doctor it, but they don't.
Not separate to do the work.
It's other. No, I'm doing it this way so I don't have to scroll up and down through all this and look for them, go hunting for them, because it would take me hours to look for individual comments from individual students and keep tally of who's done what. I put it on them to demonstrate to me that they've done it. And then once you see them, my rubric on this is, if it's a 10-point thing, they're getting 5 of the points are for doing the actual posting and commenting, and the other 5 points is the quality of what they're saying. If they're just doing attaboys, well, you get that, I also, once we've done that thing, I encourage them to keep going back to the board, because I'll share stuff that I've found that's new on Pinterest. And I never talk about this in class. And what's interesting is, so, for example, in the current social media classes, we have a Snapchat exercise coming up in week 14. Because lots of brands are using Snapchat now. First time I've done it. I've posted a couple of things in here about Snapchat for brands. I'm not going to talk about it, I'm not going to mention it in class, but the students who follow this board are going to have a decided advantage when it comes to that. The people who haven't seen it are not going to be at a disadvantage, but when the ones who have been paying attention, they will do a much better job of that week 14 assignment. And that's their reward for having paid attention like I asked them to. And I think somebody told me on Rate My Professor, which I never look at, someone said, he's sneaky. Pay attention to all his tips and tricks. He's really trying to help you.
Do you
So-
get a notification when somebody posts on Pinterest in this private?
In the private board, you can set it up that way, but they have to do it on their end. I mean, I invite them in through an email address, but on their end, they have to say, do they want notifications? And I encourage them to do that, but I can't make them do it. So this is Vine, which, this teaching others thing I think is great. It also works on this level that you might not think about in terms of your own classes. It helps promote your class, because they put this out there on Vine. Vine is a Twitter tool, so they also have to make sure it goes out on Twitter, on the class hashtag, and it sits out there. And actually, I've gotten even sneakier about this now. Speaking of being sneaky, I have the class hashtag, and now I make them do hashtag RIT, which anyone who's on Twitter at RIT is following hashtag RIT, so all these other people who have no connection to the class are now seeing these vines, particularly if there's something that has something to do with RIT. But let me just show you a couple. I don't know if you're going to be able to, fingers crossed, maybe. So you can see Vine just loops through endlessly, and I try not to leave it running too long because it gets tedious after a while. So I'll bail out of that one.
Is it showing something different on yours again?
Oh, it's not showing up there? Ah, all right. All right, so let's just hang on. We'll pause this for a minute. Let's go. I wonder why it's not doing that. Oh, we might have to bail out of this too. So you should remember that name. Brendan's going to be a rock star product designer at some point. And Dave will know Claire Owen Shubnell, who did this. Oops, I get this thing. So, you know, the pacing's a little too fast. It's not perfect, but, you know, it's a start. Now let's go back to...
It's the concept that's.
Yep. And this is the one that, if I see, get it. This helped her get a job, Hannah Barry. Yeah.
Did you assign Trisket, or she just picked it?
No, my assignments are usually on a theme. So sometimes it'll be candy. Sometimes it'll be like a health food, which was the bar. Another time it was a key lesson you've learned in this class, so the be professional thing. In this case, it was anything you would snack on. This was for an advertising copywriting class. So that's why Hannah will tell you that she thinks this Vine was one of the things that helped her get a job right out of school. So, you know, that's good to hear. All right, we'll get rid of that. Go back to... Yay. So I'm a big fan of using Vine, and they all seem to love doing it. And they also seem surprised that I give them some time off of class to do this. You know, so in the week when there's 2 hour and 15-minute classes, they show up at the start of the second class and they say, okay, any questions about what you're going to do on the Vine? And there's usually a couple of questions. Say, okay, you're free to go, but turn in a really good Vine and just remember everything we've talked about. And, oh yeah, a whole hour to do a 7-second video. And then next week they'll come in. So, you know, because that Trisket one, I think Hannah said she put almost 4 hours into making that. There's a lot of work to make it just right.
Do you teach them editing skills, or?
No, I just...
Assembly edits, or?
No, I mean, really what I do is there's 2 YouTube videos I share. They're both fairly short on how to make a Vine that looks good. There's a blog post on how to do stop motion. I think there's like 3 or 4 other posts that I share. Oh, and there's one on storyboarding and the importance of, you know, what do you want to see in the shot? What's it going to look like? What do you need props-wise to plan out ahead? And you know, the good students, they read all the stuff, they watch the videos, and they do good stuff. The ones that realize, oh, bleep, it's an hour to deadline, you can tell. In fact, one of my students actually got thrown out of student housing because they had to do something with a product. Oh, it had to be something to do with tape. It was a random. I don't know why I picked tape. So it was a bunch of duct tape and Scotch tape, and some people did nice Christmas gifts. It was the end of that holiday season. They duct taped their roommate to the wall of the apartment, and said duct. And as they were shooting the Vine, he came away with a piece of the wall. So strong, the wall goes with you. Yeah, I can't help with common sense. You are?
I'd question the roommate more than the kid.
Yeah, anyway, LinkedIn. Now, I don't use this in class, but I stress why it's important. And there's a few stats up there, which if you can't read it, the Society of Human Resource Management, SHRM, does this anonymous survey of its members every couple of years because theoretically human resource professionals won't fess up to doing things like background checks through Google and whatever. So they want to know what's really going on. So they do this survey where every member, if they want to, can anonymously answer things. What's interesting is 87% of employers say they're using social media to research, just social media to research potential employees. 99% of those say that if they go to LinkedIn, they expect to find you there. And when I give this presentation like I did this morning for the capstone course in the School of Individualized Studies, I say, you've all got optimized LinkedIn profiles, right? And I tell them, it's important. You've got to do it. You're expected to be found there. And if you haven't got one, do it today. Because I can tell you, I know graduating seniors who suddenly realize they're applying for jobs, and when you search for them online, you don't find anything. Well, in today's world, that's kind of suspicious. And And then lastly but not least, but writing that profile summary, descriptions of your work experience can actually be a very good writing exercise. Sum up your work experience at a co-op or whatever in 2 sentences, packed with information that makes people think, wow, I got to hire this person. It's a really good exercise for them. A few other platforms quickly. I have used Facebook groups a couple of times. They're ideal in a sense for classroom discussions. And they're a whole lot easier than my courses. Just saying.
Almost anything is. That's a low bar to exceed.
Yeah, don't mention my name to Ken Kindler. I think I'm the Antichrist as far as he's concerned about my complaints about my courses. But anyway.
Aren't you finding that more and more students aren't using Facebook though?
Oh, well, that's true. Absolutely. While the numbers 55 and older are going up, the numbers 25 and under are plummeting. But having said that, they have Facebook accounts. It's not a hardship to have them say, you need to join this Facebook group. So, Instagram is interesting, particularly for this very, very visually oriented generation. So what I've done a couple of times is I've had them either use Instagram to take 2 or 3 images, post them on a hashtag so they can all be found around a core theme of the class. That's one way of doing it. Another thing I've done is occasionally, if I feel like boosting RIT, is I'll say, it's winter around here, what are you going to do? I want you to post 3 things to Instagram that tell a what's unique about RIT. And if I'm really smart, I'll time it during Humans versus Zombies week, which is always interesting. And then I'll tell them, post a couple of still photos and a video or 2 videos and a still photo that you can use this on Instagram. But the important thing is we want to talk about, whatever the topic is. And I've done that. I did that once in the advertising copywriting class because it's a way of getting them to focus their thinking on how you tell a story about something. And a lot of brands are now using Instagram for advertising purposes. For aggregating information, I've played with, but I have not yet used this in class, but someone down at Hofstra that I talk to once in a while swears that Flipboard is the tool for gathering information. And what she does is she creates, I don't know if you're familiar with Flipboard, but you create these little sources like magazines. You invite all the students to post to one magazine that's class-centric, and you sort of essentially keep a tally, and there's sort of bonus points available for the person that posts the most to the Flipboard can get 3 bonus points at the end of the semester. The person who gets the most comments on their thing can get a couple of bonus points. The person who posts the most about topic X. There's all kinds of ways you can encourage. And then what they do is she builds part of her second lecture each week based on stuff that's been shared to the Flipboard. So it's all relevant to the kids. They're sharing stuff and they're seeing it show up in the classroom. And that sort of reinforces and becomes a way to use it. And then last but not least, Snapchat. And this is something I don't use it a lot, so I'm learning as I do this with the students. But do you create what they call a story, and then the students post to the story, and they're sort of building this version of a story about something. There are, in Snapchat, what they call geotags. There are things that pop up in a certain geo-fenced area when you go to post that, and RIT has 2 of them right now. It'll have 3 by the time Imagine RIT comes around. So you encourage students to post, be aware of all the different geotags, and again, do it on a theme. So when we do this assignment in a few weeks, and please don't tip my hand to students in the class, but we're going to be doing, it's going to happen to be the week leading up to Imagine RIT, so they're going to have 3 geotags to work with. They're going to have to post 2 videos and 3 still images, and they're going to have to talk about something that makes RIT unique, interesting, or fun. And so that story, for anyone else that they're connected to or anyone else that finds it, suddenly there's going to be all these things relating to why RIT is kind of a cool place. So again, that's storytelling with social media, which is one of the themes that runs through the class. And but I'm happy to answer questions. There are a ton of social media tools out there and a ton of possibilities. And I just,
Do you find that there's any concern with, I guess I'll just call it plagiarism, whether it's intentional or unintentional?
I think there's definitely the possibility of unintentional. I think one of the things social media has taught this current generation of students is you don't want to be seen as doing something that someone else has already done. There's sort of this unwritten thing in social media that if you're just doing what someone else has done exactly the same, it's kind of like a no-no. And it's not because it's plagiarism, it's just because, look at you, how unoriginal are you?
What about then the posting of information that's not been vetted? For instance, one of your assignments is post a shocking statistic about social media, unusual statistic about social media. So I go on and online, I find that like infants really enjoy Snapchat more than they do Twitter because somebody goofy wrote that and I now post that as fact. Does that ever come into?
Sure. So what I do is two things. One is they have to give the fact and they have to use the link shortening, URL shortening thing to link to the source.
Well, you can check it out yourself.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, and it's too outrageous, obviously, you know. But the other thing I say to them is, you know, it's buyer beware, particularly on social media. Anything that's posted out there, and we talk about sites like Snopes, S-N-O-P-E-S. You should be familiar with Snopes.com. Basically, it's the biggest debunker of internet myths out there. It's like the Bible for finding garbage on social media. So we talk about Snopes, and I said, yeah, I'm an avid believer and user of Snopes. If any of you ever post anything as fact, and I go to Snopes and find that it isn't, it's an automatic 0, do it twice, you get an F in this course. You can't be responsible for posting stuff that's not factual or accurate, period. You don't want to have that reputation. And so, you know, students get caught doing it once, then they get really nervous because if they do it one more time, you know, of course, I don't know legally if I can just fail someone for that, but the threat nonetheless is good enough to. But yeah, I do tell them that, you know, if you're going to share something, you should verify it before you share it. And if you can't verify it, you should maybe find something else.
Did you know that Coca-Cola has just bought Dr. Pepper and they're going to discontinue it?
Oh, that's on
It
Snopes.
says that's not true.
Right. Yeah. I was going to say, that sounds like something I read as not true on Snopes. Yeah.
What's your criteria for deciding whether to put a tool in front of your students?
That's a good question. I guess it comes down to 2 or 3 things. One is the learning curve to get into it, which is why I've stayed away from Snapchat for a while because, frankly, I could not figure it out. But it turns out once you can. So learning curve to get into it, how collaborative it can be. If you're just posting and it's hard to find some collaborative aspect to it, I don't know that it's that useful as a tool. And I guess the last thing is the sort of the potential for showing students in a good light. There are a lot of tools out there, and I'm trying to think. Well, again, we'll go back to some of the live video streaming tools. You know, if I were to require them to use that in a class, and there's a way that you can have the live video stream be sort of recorded so you can for viewing later, it would be in amongst some occasionally inappropriate content, and I'm just uncomfortable with that. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Generally, how do you find that you hear about new social media?
Well, that's sort of that's what I live and breathe. So outside of RIT, you know, I have a very small social media consultancy. It's what there's a half a dozen news sites on social media that I'm following on a regular basis. But here's another exercise that I'm doing this week in my 2 classes is that every time I hear about a new social network that's starting to get traction, and by that I mean they have at least a couple of 100,000 users, I add it to my list of new social apps and I drop a couple off that never went anywhere. And that list becomes a research project in week 12 in the social media classes where they have to pick one of them, and the list is up to about 40 at any given time. They have to pick one as though they were analyzing it on behalf of a business or organization about whether that business or organization should jump in there, what the benefits might be, who's likely to be there, that kind of thing. it's great for me because they're doing my research, but they're helping each other understand all these new networks out there too. So